Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the media, good friends and also. Mr. President, let me welcome you, your family, and your delegation to South Africa. This is your second visit to South Africa and your first as President of the United States. We are delighted to host you. Let me also congratulate you on your re-election as President of the United States. Our talks have taken place against the background of the ill health of our beloved former President Nelson Mandela, the founding president of our democracy, who is much loved by our people and the world. I know that he is your personal hero as well, Mr. President. The two of you are also bound by history as the first black presidents of your respective countries. Thus, you both carry the dreams of millions of people in Africa and in the diaspora who were previously oppressed. We continue to pray for Madiba's good health and well-being. As we prepare to celebrate 20 years of freedom and democracy in April next year, we extend our deepest gratitude to the anti-apartheid movement in the United States for solidarity. Mr. President, as a student, you also participated actively in campaigns against apartheid, especially promoting dismantlement and disinvestment from apartheid South Africa of the investments that had been made in the history by the United States. We are pleased to be working with you today with a common goal of expanding trade relations between our two countries. We are, in essence, shifting from disinvestment to reinvestments in the era of freedom and democracy. Mr. President, you are visiting Africa at the right time. Africa is rising. It is the second fastest growing region after Asia and has become an attractive market for investment. Thus, the United States strategy towards sub-Saharan Africa that you launched last year is well timed to take advantage of this growing market. We already see immense value in our strategic partnerships such as BRICS and IPSA, and look forward to strengthening the US-Africa partnership. We are pleased with the growing bilateral trade and investment. There are 600 US companies in South Africa which have created in excess of 150,000 jobs. The US is also a major export market for South African products. South Africa, in turn, is your biggest market in Africa, accounting for more than $7 billion of exports. We reaffirm the need for the extension of the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which expires in 2015. Our mutual trade has reached the levels preceding the global recession, largely due to the Act. Arising out of this visit, we would like to see increased investment in the South African economy for mutual benefit. We have placed on the table bankable projects which range from infrastructure development to skills development for the youth, and also across a number of sectors like information and communication technologies, agriculture, and the green economy. We have urged that underpinning these investments should be the drive for regional integration, industrialization, and localization of supply and manufacture. Mr. President, youth development is a key focus area for South Africa, given that a third of our population is under the age of 15. This is a key feature of our national development plan. Therefore, we welcome our cooperation in education, especially the school capacity and innovation program, as well as investment in primary education and teacher training. It is also our wish to extend cooperation on vocational training to develop our further education and training colleges. We acknowledge the ongoing cooperation in the area of defense under the auspices of the South Africa-US Defense Committee and the training of the security services in crime fighting. We have lauded the successful health cooperation under the US President's emergency plan for AIDS relief funding to address HIV and AIDS and other infectious diseases, which has contributed to the successes and increase in life expectancy. On promoting the African agenda, we reaffirm our common commitment to strengthening democratic governance and advancing the protection of human rights on the continent. We would like to cooperate with the US in enhancing peace building and post-conflict reconstruction and development cooperation under the umbrella of the United Nations and the African Union. We are concerned about the mushrooming of rebel movements in some countries in the continent at a time when the AU is promoting adherence to its policy of zero tolerance for people who come to office through unconstitutional means. This is a threat to our hard-won peace in many countries in the continent. Mr. President, we're encouraged by the relaxation of sanctions on Zimbabwe by the US government and urge further steps in this regard as it will strengthen the economy of Zimbabwe. We are hopeful that the African Union, with the support of the international community, will find solutions to the challenges we face in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Mali, Niger, and Central African Republic and Somalia. Solutions that are African-led will be able to yield results. The problems in the Sahel region arise primarily from the manner in which the UN Security Council handled the Libyan situation. There are lessons to be learned in the episode. We have talked about this in our meeting, Mr. President. Mr. President, South Africa remains concerned at the lack of progress in the Middle East peace process. We unequivocally support the Palestinian bid for statehood and believe in the principle of a two-state solution. We have noted your latest attempts to revive the stalled negotiations, and you have our support in this regard. At the same time, we are of the view that a lasting peace in the Middle East would not be possible without addressing the other ongoing conflicts in the region, which are a source of much insecurity and instability. We are encouraged by the positive steps you have taken, Mr. President, to relax long-standing restrictions on Cuba. I further urge you, Mr. President, in light of the economic and financial challenges in the US and in the Eurozone, to encourage our traditional supporters not to abandon their pledges to Africa. Let me also add that the reform of the United Nations Security Council is long overdue and remains a high priority to South Africa, the African continent, and the developing world as a whole. Finally, Mr. President, I wish to reiterate South Africa's commitment to the relationship with the USA. I'm happy that you will visit Robben Island during your visit, which was home to Madiba and many freedom fighters in our country for decades. I wish you pleasant and productive stay in South Africa for the remainder of your visit. We are truly honored to host you, Mr. President, and I thank you. I now invite you, Mr. President, to address the media. You have the floor.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. President, for your generous words and your kind welcome. It is wonderful to be back in South Africa. As you mentioned, I had the pleasure of visiting South Africa before when I was a U.S. Senator. Michelle and our daughters were here just 2 years ago, and we're now thrilled to be back as a family. And I know that the press corps, by the way, is happy to be here because this is much more elegant than the White House press room. It's a big improvement. I have to begin, of course, by saying that our thoughts and those of Americans and people all around the world are with Nelson Mandela and his family and all of South Africans. The struggle here against apartheid, for freedom, Madiba's moral courage, this country's historic transition to a free and democratic nation has been a personal inspiration to me. It has been an inspiration to the world, and it continues to be in so many regions that are divided by conflict, sectarian disputes, religious or ethnic wars, to see what happened in South Africa, the power of principle and people standing up for what's right, I think continues to shine as a beacon. And so the outpouring of love that we've seen in recent days shows that the triumph of Nelson Mandela and this nation speaks to something very deep in the human spirit, the yearning for justice and dignity that transcends boundaries of race and class and faith and country. That's what Nelson Mandela represents. That's what South Africa at its best can represent to the world. And that's what brings me back here on what will be a two-day trip in which I have an opportunity to meet with a whole range of leaders here in South Africa. The President and I have enjoyed our company quite a bit in the G20 and in various multilateral forums. Usually, unfortunately, when we're meeting, there's some crisis going around around the world. We had a more leisurely conversation today, and we both agreed that the state of bilateral relations between the United States and South Africa are extraordinarily strong. As one of the BRICS, South Africa's growth reflects the new realities of a global economy, and we welcome that. We don't simply recognize it. That's one of the reasons why I institutionalized the G20, because it reflects the reality of today's world and today's economy and the need for this continent to be represented in any discussions about the direction of the world economy. So the United States views South Africa as a critical partner. And Mr. President, I very much appreciate our personal friendship and partnership. As you've noted, Africa is on the rise, and South Africa is always at the forefront of trends in Africa. I see South Africa as critical to one of my top priorities on this trip, and that is to promote trade and investment that helps unleash economic growth here in Africa and ultimately will benefit the United States of America. We export more products to South Africa than any other nation in sub-Saharan Africa. Hundreds of companies, as you noted, operated here in South Africa. South African companies are investing back in the United States, like Sasol, with plans for billions of dollars in investment in U.S. energy and manufacturing, including my home state of Illinois. And as the largest economy in the region, growth here can drive growth all across Africa. So I want our countries to be doing more business together. And one of the things that I've said to our press corps during this trip is that all too often attention is only paid to Africa when there's a crisis. But in fact, 6 of the 10 largest economies in the world, or 6 of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world are in Africa. There's enormous progress being made and enormous potential to be made, but obviously we have a lot more work to do, and I think we can do it better together. Today, almost all of South Africa's exports to the United States, 98%, already enter our markets duty-free. And I told President Zuma that I want to renew, but also improve and update the African Growth and Opportunity Act so we're generating more trade and more jobs. I've got to be able to show American companies that are operating on a level playing field when they invest or are trying to export into South Africa. So we're going to make sure that our trade negotiators have a serious conversation about how we get a win-win formula that delivers jobs and opportunity for people here in South Africa and also in the United States. Our commitment to progress and human dignity extends to our shared efforts to combat HIV/AIDS. You know, since I took office, we've continued the good work of PEPFAR, and we've built on it. So here in South Africa, we're delivering antiretroviral treatments to 1.6 million people, which along with our prevention efforts is helping to save millions of lives. And I want to commend South Africa for its outstanding leadership on this issue. Within a few years, South Africa will become the first country in Africa to fully manage its HIV care and treatment program, and the United States will increasingly focus on prevention and strengthening public health systems. So this is an example of how, rather than a one-way street of aid to Africa, instead this is a partnership of equals working together to solve common challenges, and that's what we need to see in all areas of endeavor. We're working together to advance the dignity of all of our citizens. Since opportunities for women and girls means greater prosperity for everybody, I'm hopeful that we will be able to welcome South Africa to our Equal Futures Partnership, an effort internationally to make sure that every country is committed to developing the possibilities and opportunities for women and for girls. Some people know that my mother was involved in international development. She taught me when I was very young, you can measure how well a country does by how well it treats its women. If it's educating its women and giving them opportunities, that country does well. When they do not, that country does not advance. And I believe that. So I also want to commend your Parliament for passing a landmark law to combat the modern slavery that is human trafficking, something that is still a crisis around the world. This afternoon, I'll be in Soweto to announce a major expansion of our initiative to invest in the young Africans who will shape this country and this continent for decades to come. And regionally, I want to thank South Africa for being a leading voice in the African Union, from promoting peace between Sudan and South Sudan to encouraging economic cooperation across the continent. As the President mentioned, we discussed the situation in Zimbabwe, and President Zuma's played an important role in the region's mediation efforts. We agreed that the harassments of citizens and groups needs to stop, and reforms need to move forward so the people of Zimbabwe can cast their votes in elections that are fair and free and credible. We also discussed the Congo, where I have assigned a new U.S. envoy to the region, Russ Feingold, a former senator and chairman of the Africa Committee. He's going to lead our efforts in support of the framework for peace. And the United States and South Africa agree that all nations should implement the commitments under that framework quickly to bring the tragedy of the Congo to an end. And finally, as President Zuma mentioned, we discussed a range of global challenges. Our governments don't agree on every issue. No two countries do. But we've seen the progress that we can make together on nuclear security, on climate change. Given South Africa's history and given what it represents to the world, and given the interests we share as democracies that believe in constitutions and rule of law and human rights and the dignities of all people, I believe that we can stand shoulder to shoulder for issues of security and justice and human rights. And I believe that when the United States and South Africa stand together on an issue in multilateral forum, it's hard to resist. It's hard to resist. So, President Zuma, I want to thank you for welcoming me here today. I want to thank you for the work that we've done together. It is a great joy for me to be spending time here in South Africa. I've had occasion to visit Robben Island myself, but for me to be able to bring my daughters there and teach them the history of that place and this country, and help them to understand not only how those lessons apply to their own lives, but also to their responsibilities in the future as citizens of the world. That's a great privilege and a great honor. So I thank you, and to all the people of South Africa. There is enormous affection and admiration for you in the United States, and I hope that I adequately expressed that during my visit.
Thank you very much, Your Excellencies. We'll now take questions. Zwandi Lembeje, SABC.
Warm greetings to both presidents. I will ask the questions to both presidents. Maybe starting with President Obama. You have come to Africa, to South Africa, of course, to boost and strengthen trade. So perhaps someone is saying, well, the United States is somehow threatened because there are other players who are coming to Africa, especially China. China is not only coming here in weight, but also in deed. So is perhaps President Obama not threatened that the leading role they've always played is in danger? And the other quick question, President Obama, South Africa's bid to UN Security Council, should it come, will the United States support it? A seat in at the UN? To President Zuma, you, as the leading voice, as President Obama has indicated, on the African continent in trying to bring stability and peace, we have seen some pockets of rebels, as you indicated, in Congo, in Mali, and elsewhere. So what sort of assistance, perhaps, have you asked from President Obama, I mean, as America is one of the advanced countries that can help in many areas? Thank you.
Well, first of all, I'm here in Africa because I think the United States needs to engage in a continent full of promise and possibility. I think it's good for the United States, regardless of what others do. I actually welcome the attention that Africa is receiving from countries like China and Brazil and India and Turkey, because number one, the more interest they show in Africa, the more tools we have and mechanisms we have to further incorporate Africa into the global economy, which has the potential of creating jobs and businesses and opportunity. So I don't feel threatened by it. I think it's a good thing. Now, I do think that it's important for Africans to make sure that these interactions are good for Africa. Because let me just take the example of natural resources. I think there's been a long history of extracting resources from Africa. You take raw materials, you send them to someplace else where they get used, processed, sometimes sold back to Africa. The profits stay there, the jobs stay there, and not much stays in Africa. Right? There's a long history of that. Well, the truth is the United States at this point, on issues of energy, for example, frankly, we don't need energy from Africa. Because of advances that have been made, we're seeing oil production and natural gas production, as well as clean energy production, all growing at a rapid rate in the United States. So our primary interest when it comes to working with Africa on energy issues has to do with how do we power Africa so that it can be an effective market, creating jobs and opportunity in Africa, but then we also then have somebody to trade with and sell iPods to, and airplanes, and all kinds of good stuff. So when we look at what other countries are doing in Africa, I think our only advice is make sure it's a good deal for Africa. Somebody says they want to come build something here, are they hiring African workers? Somebody says that they want to help you develop your natural resources, how much of the money is staying in Africa? If they say that they're very interested in a certain industry, is the manufacturing and value added done in Africa? Are they tolerating corruption that's not benefiting the people, but just benefiting a few at the top in their interactions with African countries? Those are the questions Africa should be asking. And hopefully one of the things that we can do is, in our interactions, as a country that doesn't have a colonial history here, as a country that has made large investments in development on issues like HIV/AIDS, hopefully we can garner some trust when people ask us, what are the kinds of development strategies that are going to be sustaining over the long term. But as I said, I want everybody playing in Africa. The more the merrier. I think that's good, and it gives Africans leverage, which I think is useful. But again, ask those questions. Don't just assume that folks come here and they're automatically benefiting Africans. And that includes the United States, Ask questions in terms of what we do. With respect to the United Nations, President Zuma and I discussed the fact that just as I wanted to institutionalize the G20 because it's more reflective of the world, I think the United Nations structure, which was created post-World War II, is going to have to be updated. How we do that, in what fashion, is complicated. It's difficult. And it involves all kinds of politics. I will say this, that an expansion of, let's say, the Security Council, in which the continent of Africa had no representation, would be odd. But how that moves forward is something that I think will involve a lot of negotiations and a lot of discussions. And the one thing that I shared with President Zuma is everybody wants a seat at the table, but when it comes time to step up and show responsibility, sometimes people want to be free riders. They love sitting around the table deciding what to do, except when it comes to bearing the burdens, bearing the costs, sometimes sharing the blame for difficult decisions that have to be made, then suddenly, well, I'm neutral. I'm non-aligned. Don't ask me to, I'm not referring to South Africa particularly, I'm just saying countries generally like the idea of being part of forums, but one of the things that the United States has done, and obviously we're not perfect, but our seat at the table comes by virtue of the fact that we bear a lot of responsibility. If there's a crisis in the world, people ask us, what are you doing about it? They ask, why haven't you intervened militarily? You're letting people die. And if we intervene militarily, they ask, why did you intervene militarily? They ask us to foot the bill. And the expectation is, why aren't you footing the bill? If there's poverty or crisis or a humanitarian disaster, the natural expectation immediately is, what's the United States doing? Now, we shoulder that burden gladly. We think that's part of our responsibilities. We have been incredibly blessed. But the simple point I make, and I say this everywhere I go, is with rights come responsibilities and burdens. And it's not always comfortable, and you can't always make everybody happy. It's like being president of a country.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, thank you very much. Firstly, the question of Africa and its history and the developments globally, I think should be taken from what they are, without assumptions. Today we are talking about the globalized world. If the world is globalizing, why should there be a question about Africa? That Africa must remain somewhere when everybody is working together, really. I think since the end of the Cold War, the world is working together. There's no country that is isolated. China has a lot of relations with UK, USA. Africa as a region, why must it be singled out for some views, so to speak? I don't think, in my own understanding, much as the question are understandable, but I think it's being unfair to Africa. Why should Africa be told who must have relations with and not this one and that one? Mm-hmm. I don't think that talks to our acceptance of globalization. We are globalizing, and Africa must be part of globalization. And you can't say we are globalizing because we have relations with certain regions, not other regions. And if we have relations with other regions, then we are questioned. Nor do I think countries that come to interact with Africa should be questioned. Why are you doing it? I think it is in the nature of globalization that, in fact, Africa is saying it can no longer be bypassed by events that change the world. We are part of it. And that's why we relate to the bigger countries, bigger economies. We want the relationship, as President Obama was saying, that benefits both. Because historically, the kind of relations we had with other regions were one-sided. All what the president was saying, that we want localization to be taken into account, whoever is trying to make relations with us, beneficiation of our resources, so that they benefit us. We ourselves, as another kind of area, we have said we need to do trade among ourselves, inter-trade in the continent of Africa. We are putting our 5 economic regions together so that we work as a continent together. We are having massive program in terms of the infrastructure to implement what you are talking about, to create that necessary platform, so that whoever comes to invest, we don't ask, are you an American, are we a Chinese? No, we enter into the relationship that must benefit both. And I'm happy that the United States share that view as well. So that is how these interactions are interpreted insofar as the African continent is concerned. We have been growing to speak with one voice, and we are now speaking in one voice as a continent. And that's why we look at those who try to pull one country this side and the other that side. That's why even the relations that we have with other regions, we are trying to do them as a unit, as an entity, as a region, rather than as individual countries. So that's what is happening. So we don't regard those who come to us that they are coming here because of other reasons that we don't know. We take them genuinely that we are establishing relations that must benefit us, who must also appreciate the history of the continent, where we come from, why we are lagging behind, what is that they could do to help us in terms of the relationships that we have to move forward as well. With regard to the issue of the United Nations Security Council, I again agree with the President that really this institution was done in the mid-40s, when many countries did not exist. They did not participate in drawing up the rules and regulations. Things have changed. The world is different today. We can't continue with those kind of conditions. It does not reflect the reality of what is happening today. And that's why we believe each and every region must be represented at all levels so that we can be part of decision-making in this international important body. So the process is important that it is looked at, but also we should be realistic. Because again, whilst we say we need that, as the President was saying, we don't want people who are just going to come and sit there and enjoy status. Countries must be looked at, or regions. Why should countries be members of this important body that take final decisions? Do they have a contribution to make? What is it that is going to be used as a criteria for countries, individual countries, let alone the regions, as to why this particular country must be a member? Those are matters, I think, those who are in the national or the UN National Security Council, or UN Security Council rather, they must begin to discuss those matters. What is it that we are going to say are important criteria to say this country can come, so that we help the process? Because if big countries are not talking about it, you then allow the process to stay there, and people saying all sorts of things. Even the smallest countries, they've got the right to say something, but they may be expecting to be there and they may have no contribution to make. I'm not saying other countries can't, they can. But we are talking about an institution that takes very decisive decisions about the life of this globe. So I'm just saying, I would be happy if this matter is pushed quicker so that final decisions are taken. On your question regarding whether we discussed what is that the United States could do to help Africa in the processes that it is trying to help itself economically, security situation, etc. We discussed that and we have agreed. And then I'm very happy, the agreement is very clear, that Africa has said we need the African-led kind of processes, and that others should help support that process. And we are at one with President Obama on that one, and it's absolutely correct, so that we should be supported. We are looking at very specific things. One of them is the issue, for an example, of this new trend of rebels in the continent. We need to do something to stop it, because if it is not stopped, it could be another huge chapter like the chapter of coups in Africa. And we want to nip it in the bud. And therefore, the last summit of the AU took a decision and asked countries to volunteer who could be part of a standby force to react immediately there is an action to deal with it. And we would want big countries like the United States to support us in those kind of action. And I think we are in agreement with that one. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellencies. I now hand over to Jay.
From the Associated Press, Julie Pace.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to first see if you could comment on the situation in Egypt and the U.S. concern about protests there. And also, politics in Kenya appear to have affected your ability to travel there despite your family ties. Can you reflect personally on not being able to go to the country where your father was born? And what does the situation in Kenya and in places like Zimbabwe say about the difficulties of fulfilling Nelson Mandela's vision for democracy on the continent? And President Zuma, a similar question for you. Given your country's high unemployment and other social challenges, is the ANC in its current form living up to Mandela's legacy? Thank you.
Well, on Egypt, obviously we're all looking at the situation there with concern. The United States has supported democracy in Egypt. It has been challenging, given that there is not a tradition of democracy in Egypt. And the Egyptian people have been finding their way. Our most immediate concern with respect to protests this weekend have to do with our embassies and consulates. And so we have been in direct contact with the Egyptian government, and we have done a whole range of planning to make sure that we're doing everything we can to keep our embassies and consulates protected, and our diplomats and personnel there safe. But more broadly, what we've said publicly and what we've said privately is that we support peaceful process or peaceful protests and peaceful methods of bringing about change in Egypt. I think every party has to denounce violence. We'd like to see the opposition and President Morsi engaged in a more constructive conversation around how they move their country forward, because nobody is benefiting from the current stalemate that exists there. And we do not take sides in terms of who should be elected by the Egyptian people. We do take sides in terms of observing a process for democracy and rule of law, and that all the players there engage in the necessary tough compromises so that they can start focusing on the things that probably matter most to the ordinary Egyptian, which is jobs, energy costs, food costs, housing, schooling for their kids, creating economic opportunity. And Egypt, I think, for the last year and a half, 2 years, has had great difficulty focusing on those vital issues. So, again, top priority, making sure that our embassies and consulates are prepared for this wave of protests. Number two, we are supportive of freedom of speech and freedom of assembly inside of Egypt, but we would urge all parties to make sure that they're not engaging in violence and that police and military are showing appropriate restraint. And number three, how do we make sure that we get this political process back on track? And that's a difficult and challenging situation. But Egypt is the largest country in the Arab world, and I think the entire region is concerned that if Egypt continues with this constant instability, that has adverse effects more broadly. Your second question, Kenya. You know, there had just been an election in Kenya that thankfully did not see the same kind of violence as the previous election. A newly installed president, but let's be honest, a situation in which this new government was still working out issues with the international community, in part dating back to the previous election. And the timing was not right for me as the President of the United States to be visiting Kenya when those issues are still being worked on and hopefully at some point resolved. And we believe that Kenya needs to abide by various international commitments that it's made. Having said that, Kenya is one of our oldest partners in the continent. We have outstanding bilateral relations. The people-to-people contacts between the United States and Kenya remain extraordinarily strong. We work with them on all sorts of issues, economic, security, youth exchanges, you name it. And that will continue. And my personal ties to the people of Kenya, by definition, are going to be strong and will stay strong. And I have been to Kenya multiple times in the past, and I expect I will be to Kenya multiple times in the future, and will continue to be deeply concerned with the progress that's made in that country. And I think it has enormous potential. You know, Kenya is like South Africa. You know, there's a country blessed with incredible resources, incredible beauty, brilliant people. There have been times in the past where government held back progress, and in sometimes ethnic conflict held back progress. And obviously prior to that, colonialism and racism sometimes held back progress. But the future for Kenya, like the future of the continent, is potentially bright, and the United States wants to be a partner in that process. Did you have a third question for me?
How the situation in Kenya and also places like Zimbabwe, do they speak to the difficulties of...
Well, yeah, absolutely. Look, Nelson Mandela showed what is possible, and the people of South Africa have shown what's possible when a priority is placed on constitutions and rule of law and respect for human dignity, and that all people are treated equally, and that we rise above our parochial concerns. And what Nelson Mandela also stood for is the recognition that the well-being of a country is more important than the interests of any one person. You know, one of the reasons that George Washington is our most admired president is because after 2 terms, he said, enough, I'm going back to being a citizen. And if you look at U.S. history, There was no rule at the time in the Constitution. There were no term limits. And he was so popular, he could have easily been President of the United States for life. But he said, I'm a citizen. I serve my time. I engage my service, and then it's time for the next person, because that's what a democracy is about. And Nelson Mandela, similarly, I think was able to recognize that despite how revered he was, that part of this transition process was to make sure that it was bigger than just one person, even one of the greatest people in history. What an incredible lesson that is. And so I think for the entire continent, for every leader, not just in Africa, for every leader around the world to think about those principles. That governance for the people has to be based on constitutions and rules in which every person is treated equally and nobody is above the law. And that we as leaders, we occupy these spaces temporarily. And we don't get so deluded that we start thinking that the fate of our countries it depends on how long we stay in office. When you have that as a foundation, and then you start building in transparency and accountability and good governance and delivering services for people, then you've got a recipe for success, and the economy then starts booming and the private sector starts being effective. And so my hope would be that every country around the world, but certainly in Africa, can benefit from those lessons. If you look at Zimbabwe, it used to be one of the wealthiest countries on the continent. And bad governance has led to an economic disaster. It's now starting to come back, and thanks to the work of people like President Zuma, there's an opportunity now to move into a new phase where perhaps Zimbabwe can finally achieve all its promise. But that requires fair and free elections, and it requires those currently in power in Zimbabwe to recognize that the interests of all people have to be served there.
Thank you. Well, with regard to the question directed to me, whether the ANC government is still in keeping with Mandela's beliefs, absolutely yes.